Addison Brooke knew she was in trouble the moment she dropped her purse mid-aisle at the Sunday morning service and a man with the bluest eyes she'd ever seen knelt to pick it up. "Careful," he said, handing it to her with a warm smile that tugged at something in her chest. "You almost lost your keys. That would have been a fun little adventure after church." She blinked up at him, trying to form words. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with tousled dark hair and a jawline that looked sculpted by angels. He wore a simple dark sweater and jeans, nothing flashy. But there was something about him calm, confident, grounded. "Thanks," she managed, gripping the purse like it was a lifeline. "That would have been a disaster." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that felt like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. "Well, I'm Camden Knox. Addison," she said quickly. "Addison Brooke." "Nice to meet you, Addison Brooke," he said, still smiling as he slid into the pew behind her. She sat down, heart hammering in her chest like she'd just run a mile. What was that? She didn't come to church to meet men. She came because it was the one place she could breathe, think, and not worry about everything. Her job, her rent, her car that rattled every time it hit 50 miles per hour. Church was her quiet. But then Camden had walked in, and now everything felt loud. After the service ended, she tried to slip out quickly, but he caught up to her just outside the front doors. "Hey," he said, hands in his pockets, voice easy. "You new here? I started coming a few months ago. I usually sit in the back." "A back row saint," he teased. "I respect that." She laughed, surprised that it came out so naturally. "What about you? I've been coming here on and off for a while. Mostly when I'm in town." "In town?" she asked, raising a brow. He nodded. "I travel for work. But I'm trying to stay put for a bit." They stood there on the stone steps, the autumn breeze tugging at her curls, leaves swirling around their feet. He didn't rush the moment. Just looked at her like she was interesting, like he wanted to know more. "I was gonna grab coffee at that little place on Maple," he said. "Wanna come?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because she'd promised herself she wouldn't get distracted. Life was complicated enough already. But then she looked at him again, at the way he waited, not pushing, just hoping, and something inside her shifted. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." The cafe was quiet, tucked between a florist and a bookstore. Camden ordered for both of them after asking what she liked, and when she offered to pay for her own, he waved her off. "You can get the next one," he said. "You're already assuming there'll be a next one?" she teased. "I'm hopeful," he said, meeting her eyes. Over coffee they talked. Really talked. About everything and nothing. He asked about her job. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office and listened like every word mattered. He told her he did consulting, mostly business stuff, but didn't get into details. "I help companies grow," was all he said. He was kind. Funny. Thoughtful. There was a steadiness about him that made her feel safe, even though she barely knew him. And when he walked her to her car, a beat-up old Honda that coughed when it started, he didn't flinch. "I'd offer you a ride, but I have a feeling you'd say no," he said. "I would," she smiled. "But thanks." He leaned in slightly. "Can I see you again?" She paused, heart pounding. "Yeah. I'd like that." The next few weeks felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Camden showed up at church every Sunday after that, always slipping into the pew behind her. Afterward, they'd go for coffee or lunch, and slowly, she let him into her world. He never pushed. Never made her feel small or like she wasn't enough. He asked about her mom, who'd passed away 3 years ago. About her dreams. About why she still hadn't chased her dream of opening a floral shop. "It just doesn't make sense," she'd said once. "I don't have the money for that kind of risk." "Sometimes," he said, "the biggest risks are the ones that matter most." And she looked at him then, really looked, and wondered what his risks were. Because for all his openness, Camden didn't talk much about himself. Not really. She didn't know where he lived or what kind of car he drove. He always met her places or they walked. He wore simple clothes, always neat, never branded. There were no red flags. But still, Addison had a feeling there was something he wasn't saying. It was a Friday when she found out. They were supposed to meet for dinner, her suggestion. She wanted to treat him for once. But he messaged that he was running late and asked if she could meet him at his place instead, and they'd go together. "I'll send the address," he said, and gave her directions. And that's how she found herself pulling up to a massive white brick home with black shutters and a circular driveway in the middle of the most expensive neighborhood in town. She double-checked the address 3 times. "This can't be right," she whispered. But it was. She parked on the street, stunned. The house was huge. Not just big. Magazine cover huge. She walked up the steps, heart pounding, and before she could knock, the door opened. And there he was. Casual as ever in a Henley and jeans, barefoot, holding a glass of water. "Hey," he said, smiling. "You made it." She blinked. "You live here?" He hesitated. "Yeah. Camden," she said slowly. "What do you do?" He set the glass down and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "I didn't lie to you," he said calmly. "I do consult. I own the firm. I started it 8 years ago. We handle private investments, mergers, startups. I've done well." "How well?" she asked, her voice cracking. He looked at her, steady. "I'm a millionaire." The silence stretched between them. "Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked. "Because I didn't want that to be why you liked me. Or why you didn't." She stared at him, emotions swirling. "I like you because you're kind. Because you remember what I say. Because you waited outside while I fed a stray cat last week. But this. I don't even know what to say. I wanted to tell you," he said gently. "I just didn't want it to change everything." She took a step back. "It already has." And with that, she turned and walked down the steps, her heart cracking with every step. She didn't look back. Not even once. Addison didn't cry until she got home. Not in the car, not when she parked in the alley behind her apartment building, not while she climbed the narrow staircase to her second-floor unit with the flickering hallway light. But the moment she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, the tears came fast and silent. She slid down to the floor, holding her knees to her chest, her mind spinning. He was a millionaire. Not just well-off, not just successful. A full-blown millionaire with a consulting firm and a house that looked like it belonged in a movie. And he hadn't told her. Weeks of lunches and long walks and quiet conversations, and he'd kept that part of his life tucked away, like it didn't matter. But it did matter. Not because of the money, but because he didn't trust her enough to tell her the truth. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan and stared at the faded ceiling. A millionaire. And she made him split a plate of pancakes last week because she was low on cash and didn't want to say it out loud. Her chest ached with something bigger than disappointment. It was betrayal in disguise. She had let herself believe he was like her, simple, grounded, figuring things out one day at a time. But he had a whole world she hadn't been allowed to see. The next morning, she woke to a dull headache and a text from Camden asking if she was okay. She didn't answer. Instead, she threw herself into work. She showed up early to the dental office, organized the files no one touched, and stayed late, pretending the silence meant peace instead of confusion. Her coworkers noticed, but didn't ask. Addison wasn't the type to explode. She imploded quietly, methodically, like a house folding in on itself. On Wednesday, Camden came to the office. She was at the front desk, checking in a patient, when she saw him through the glass doors. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a navy coat and dark slacks, but he stood out like a dropped diamond in a gravel pile. Her heart jumped into her throat. She finished with the patient, then met him at the door before he could come in. "You can't be here," she said softly but firmly. I didn't know how else to get you to talk to me. I have nothing to say. He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. Then just listen. She hesitated, then stepped outside, arms crossed against the cold. I should have told you who I was, he said. I know that. I didn't lie about anything else. I've seen what happens when people find out. Everything changes. I didn't want that with you. You didn't give me the chance to decide for myself. I know. Her voice cracked. You let me believe we were on the same page. That we understood each other. I didn't want to be another man who used money to impress someone. He said, his voice low. You were honest with me from the beginning. You told me about your life, the hard parts, the fears. I kept waiting for the right time to tell you. And then I ran out of time. She looked at him, this man who had once felt so safe, so familiar. Now he felt like a stranger wearing someone else's face. You should go. He nodded once, slowly. I'll respect that. But I'm not giving up on us. As he walked away, she stayed rooted to the spot, shivering, wishing she could rewind to that first day in church when everything had felt so uncomplicated. That night she didn't sleep. Her apartment felt too small, too quiet. She turned over every memory, every word they'd shared, trying to figure out where the illusion had begun. Had anything been real? On Friday, she got a letter in the mail. Not a bill, not junk, real paper, handwritten, sealed in an envelope with her name on it. Inside, a single sheet. Addison, you once told me you used to dream about naming your own flower shop. Evergreen. I remember because you said it in passing, like it didn't matter, but your eyes lit up when you said it. I don't know if you'll ever want to speak to me again. But I meant it when I said I see you. Not just the version of yourself you showed the world. I didn't tell you the truth because I was afraid of losing something real. And I did anyway. I'm sorry. Camden. She read it twice, her fingers trembling. Then she folded it neatly and placed it on the coffee table. She didn't know what it meant yet. But it mattered that he'd remembered. That he'd listened. That weekend she tried to distract herself. She went to the farmer's market early Saturday morning and wandered the stalls with a hot cup of cider. She bought a small bouquet of late autumn dahlias from a vendor she often passed but never stopped at. The woman smiled kindly, as if sensing a heaviness she didn't ask about. On Sunday, she didn't go to church. She couldn't face him. Not yet. But the empty space in the morning felt like something missing, not something gained. That afternoon, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't pick up. Hello? Miss Brooke? Yes? This is Marie from the Willowbridge Community Center. We received a submission form from you earlier this year about renting space for a small business. You listed a floral concept, I believe it was called Evergreen? Addison's heart skipped. I did, yes. I submitted it months ago. Well, we recently had a vacancy open up in one of our featured storefronts. It's a shared space, but customizable, and we're prioritizing applicants with community-centered concepts. Your name came up. I never heard anything back before. There wasn't space at the time. But there is now. If you're still interested, we'd love to set up a meeting. Addison stood frozen in her living room, her mind racing. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I'd love to. They scheduled a walkthrough for Tuesday. After she hung up, she sat down slowly, staring at the phone in her hand. She hadn't revisited that dream in months. She'd buried it under practicality and self-doubt. And now, out of nowhere, it was rising again. But it wasn't out of nowhere. She grabbed the letter from the coffee table, reading it again. The timing. The wording. And something clicked. He had done this. He'd told her he wouldn't give up. He hadn't tried to buy her forgiveness. He'd done something more dangerous. He'd believed in her dream. Tuesday came too quickly. She met with Marie at the community center, her nerves buzzing. The space was small, cozy, sunlit in the afternoons, with brick walls and a wide front window. It's perfect, Addison whispered, running her fingers along the edge of the display shelf. "We need to finalize paperwork by the end of the week if you want to claim the slot," Marie said. "But it's yours if you want it." Addison nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I want it." That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She'd spent her life being careful, budgeting dreams down to the dollar. And now someone had taken a step on her behalf, not to impress her, but because he believed she could do more than just survive. She didn't know what came next, but she knew she owed him more than silence. On Wednesday, she walked up the steps of the white brick house with shaking hands. The door opened before she could knock. Camden looked like he hadn't slept either. He stepped back, letting her in without a word. The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. "I got a call," she said quietly. "From the community center." He didn't speak. "I know it was you. I didn't want to interfere," he said. "Just open a door you'd already knocked on." She looked around the room, the simple, elegant furniture, the quiet warmth. And then back at him. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. I'm hurt that you didn't tell me who you were. But I'm also terrified of what this means. Of what it means to be with someone like you." He took a step closer. "It means I'll never ask you to be anything but yourself." She nodded slowly. "Then I need you to do the same." For the first time, he looked uncertain. "What do you mean?" "I don't want the version of you that hides behind quiet sweaters and vague job descriptions. I want all of it. The firm, the house, the money. The real you. No more pretending." He met her eyes. "Okay. And if we do this," she said, voice trembling, "we do it together. No more secrets." Camden's eyes softened. "Deal." Addison exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something honest. Something real. And for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they were on the same page again. The first time Addison stepped into Camden's office, she felt like she'd wandered into a different universe. It was on the top floor of a glass building downtown, one she had passed a dozen times without realizing it housed anything other than law firms or architects. The elevator opened to a wide, marble-floored lobby lined with art that looked museum-worthy. A receptionist greeted her by name and offered her a bottle of sparkling water before leading her down a hallway with floor-to-ceiling windows and polished wood doors. Camden was waiting for her in a corner office larger than her entire apartment. He was standing by the window, looking out over the skyline, but turned as soon as she entered. "You came," he said, the edge of surprise in his voice not hidden. "I said I wanted honesty," she replied, setting her coat on the back of a leather chair. "Show me your world." He motioned her toward the window. "This is where I make the decisions that keep 50 people employed. It's also where I've spent far too many late nights convincing myself being alone was easier." She kept her eyes on the city. "And is it?" "No," he said quietly. "It's not." When she turned to face him, he looked different here, more precise, somehow. His posture sharper, his tone clipped with a kind of authority she hadn't heard in their previous conversations. He wasn't acting, this was him, unfiltered. This was Camden Knox, the man behind the curtain. "You run all this?" she asked. He nodded. "I started in a 2-room space across the river. Just me and a laptop. I made a few good calls early on, reinvested when everyone told me to cash out. And then it snowballed." "How old were you?" 24 when I filed the paperwork. 26 when I made my first million." She didn't flinch. She didn't want him to think she was impressed by the number. She wasn't, not in the way others likely were. "And what do you want now?" she asked. He looked at her, the corner of his mouth twitching into something soft. "Something real. Something that doesn't go away when the market dips." She stepped away from the window and walked slowly around the office. A few framed photos sat on a low shelf, one of Camden with a man who looked like an older version of him, both in baseball caps holding fishing poles, another of what looked like a team holiday dinner in a warmly lit restaurant, And then, tucked in the corner, a small framed drawing crayons on printer paper. A stick-figure man with a big smile, and what looked like a cape. She glanced back at him, lifting the frame. "What's this?" "My godson," he said, coming around the desk. "He says I'm a superhero because I bought him a new bike after his fell apart. His mom's my best friend from college. Single parent. She works harder than anyone I know." Addison set the picture down carefully. "You're not who I thought you were." "I know," he said. "But I want to be someone you can trust." She nodded once, then turned to face him fully. "I want to move forward. But I need space to figure out what that looks like." "I'll wait," he said without hesitation. "Just tell me what you need." "I need to know you aren't trying to fix me," she said. "I need to do this flower shop on my own terms. No money from you. No favors." His expression didn't change. "Then that's exactly how it'll be." That night she walked through her apartment with a notebook in one hand and her laptop in the other, listing everything she'd need to start the shop. It felt overwhelming: permits, insurance, suppliers, displays, but also thrilling. For once, the fear didn't drown out the excitement. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other, but less often. Camden respected her space, and Addison used the time to build her vision. She met with local growers, researched workshop permits, and even enrolled in a short business course offered at the community college on Thursday nights. The instructor was blunt, the assignments brutal, but she soaked up every moment. She didn't ask Camden for help. And he never offered. Instead, he sent her useful articles about customer retention, about branding, about how to negotiate commercial leases. Never with a note, never with a suggestion, just links in her inbox that she could choose to open or ignore. She opened all of them. One Saturday afternoon, Camden showed up at the community center with 2 coffees and a bag of pastries. Addison was kneeling on the floor of her soon-to-be shop, assembling the base of a display shelf. "You're early," she said, brushing sawdust off her jeans. "I figured I'd earn my keep," he said, setting the bag down. "Unless you're going to make me sign a volunteer release form." She handed him a screwdriver. "Start with that corner. No complaints." They worked in companionable silence, the smell of fresh wood and coffee mingling in the air. Occasionally, their hands brushed, but neither said anything. By the time the shelf was upright, they were both flushed and dusty. Camden sat back against the wall, breathing hard. "I haven't used a screwdriver in years," he said. "The last time I built something myself, it was a bookshelf in college that collapsed 3 days later." "Well, this one's standing," she said, wiping sweat from her neck with the hem of her shirt. He looked at her, gaze lingering. "You're different when you're building something. Lighter." She met his eyes. "I feel like I'm finally doing something that's mine." He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket. "I brought something else." He handed her a small box, not wrapped, just matte black with a hinge. She eyed it cautiously. "I told you open it," he said. Inside was a key attached to a brass tag engraved with one word, Evergreen. "I had it made," he said. "For the front door. Your front door." She closed the box and held it between her palms. "Thank you. But I'll get my own made." "I figured you'd say that," he said, standing. "But now you have a backup." Later she walked him out. The sun was setting, casting gold light through the windows of the shop. She paused in the doorway, watching him descend the steps. "Camden," she said suddenly. He turned. "I think I'm ready." "For dinner." "Just us." He didn't smile. Didn't cheer. Just looked at her with quiet intensity. "Tell me when." "Tomorrow night?" He nodded. "I'll pick you up." The next evening, he arrived in a charcoal gray Aston Martin that hummed like a living thing. Addison stared at it for a full 5 seconds before she climbed in. "Tell me this isn't your daily driver," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "I only bring it out when the occasion matters." The restaurant was tucked into the hills outside the city, a place with no sign, just a valet and a winding path lit by lanterns. Inside, the walls were stone, the tables were spaced wide apart, and everything smelled faintly of rosemary and wood smoke. The hostess greeted Camden by name. They were seated in a private alcove with a view of the vineyard beyond. The waiter brought sparkling water without being asked and spoke in hushed tones as he described the menu. "You come here often?" Addison asked once they were alone. "Not since my birthday last year," he said. "I don't like eating alone." After ordering, they fell into a different kind of conversation, deeper, more vulnerable. Addison told him about the last birthday she spent with her mother. About how they'd eaten cake for breakfast and danced in the kitchen in their socks. Camden told her about his father's heart attack, about the guilt he carried for not being there when it happened. She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers wrapping gently around his. "I'm not afraid of your life," she said. "I just needed to know there was room for mine in it." "There is," he said. "There always was." When the dessert arrived, panna cotta with fresh figs, Camden leaned forward, eyes never leaving hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Addison." She didn't look away. "I know." He laughed then, a soft, surprised sound. "I was so sure you'd make me work harder for it." "You already did," she said. "You waited. You listened. You believed in me before I believed in myself." They didn't kiss that night. Not in the car, not at her door. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "Whatever this becomes, I'm all in." And Addison, for the first time in years, believed she could be too. Addison stood in the middle of Evergreen, surrounded by unopened boxes, the scent of fresh eucalyptus and cedarwood floating through the air. The official opening was only a week away, and the space was finally starting to resemble the dream she'd carried for years. Each shelf, every vase, the carefully chosen hanging lights, none of it had come easy. But it was hers, and that truth buzzed through her like electricity. She was placing a bundle of dried lavender into a copper bucket when she heard the door click open. Camden stepped inside, his coat dusted with early spring rain, holding a paper bag in one hand and a folded umbrella in the other. "You forgot lunch," he said, setting the bag on the counter. "I didn't forget. I just didn't realize it was already 2. He handed her a sandwich wrapped in butcher paper. "You've been here since 7. Again." She leaned against the counter, unwrapping the sandwich slowly. "I lose track of time in here." He didn't comment. Instead, he reached for a roll of twine and began tying ribbons around some of the smaller potted plants she'd arranged on a display table near the window. Addison watched him for a moment, her sandwich forgotten. "You're getting good at that." "I'm a man of many hidden talents." She smiled, but it faded as a flicker of tension passed through her chest. "Are you sure you're okay with this pace? You've been driving across town just to eat lunch with me and help wrap eucalyptus bundles." "I'm choosing this," he said without looking up. "All of it." She crossed the room and sat on the stool beside him. "But your life before all this, it was meetings and flights and investors. I don't want to be the reason you step away from something you built." He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "I haven't stepped away. I've stepped towards something else. Something better. I'm serious, Camden." "So am I." His tone was steady, but she could tell there was more he wasn't saying. Later that evening, Addison stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fingers resting on the edge of the sink. She thought about the way he'd looked at her earlier, like he was holding something back. Not a lie, not this time, but a burden. The next morning, instead of heading straight to Evergreen, she drove to a small cafe on the west side of the city. The one Camden had once mentioned, where he'd taken meetings before anyone knew his name. The barista behind the counter recognized him immediately when she asked. "He hasn't been in for a while," the young woman said. "But when he comes, he always sits in the back corner." "Same table." Addison turned, looking at the worn leather booth near the window. It was empty now, but she could picture him there, laptop open, coffee half finished, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She left without ordering. That night Camden met her at her apartment. He brought takeout, but they barely touched it. "I went to that cafe today," she said. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I know I said I didn't want your help, not financially, but I need to know something." His jaw tightened. "Are you giving up part of your company because of me?" "I'm not giving anything up," he said carefully. "I'm restructuring." "Camden. It's not about you, Addison." "Not entirely. I've been thinking about it for months. Even before I met you. I've been running at full speed for years, and at some point I stopped asking why." She sat beside him on the couch. "So what happens now?" "I'm selling part of the firm. Keeping the core structure, but letting a partner take over the expansion wing. It'll let me step back without walking away." She nodded slowly. "And what will you do with the time?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "This. Be here. Build something with you." The words settled deep in her chest. That weekend, the final details for Evergreen's opening fell into place. The sign went up above the door, painted in soft green with delicate gold lettering. Camden arrived early on Sunday morning with a black garment bag slung over his shoulder. "What's that?" she asked, brushing her hands on her jeans. "You'll see." He hung it on the back of the shop door. "Don't peek." "I wasn't planning to." He grinned. "Liar." The rest of the day flew. Friends from church stopped by to help set up the outdoor display. Boxes of pastries arrived from a local bakery that had insisted on donating for the event after Addison had done their window flowers for Easter. Even her old dental office coworkers dropped by with a bouquet of congratulatory balloons. As the sun dipped behind the buildings, Camden returned from wherever he'd disappeared to earlier. He was wearing a slate blue suit that made him look unfairly good, and he was holding the garment bag again. "Your turn," he said, handing it to her. She arched a brow. "What is this?" "Go change. Trust me." She stepped into the back room and opened the bag. Inside was a tea-length dress in cream, embroidered with botanicals and soft, intricate lines. It fit like it had been made for her. She stepped out slowly. Camden's eyes swept over her, and something in his expression softened. "You look like you belong in a storybook," he said. She laughed under her breath. "This is too much." "No," he said, offering his arm. "It's exactly enough." Outside, the crowd of guests had gathered for the ribbon cutting. Addison took the ceremonial scissors, her hand trembling slightly. She looked out at the people who had come, some she knew, some she didn't. But all of them were here because she had dared to make something out of nothing. Camden stood beside her, quiet, his presence grounding her. She cut the ribbon. The cheer that followed was loud and unexpected, echoing down the block. Addison blinked, overwhelmed, and Camden leaned in close. "Breathe." She did. After the crowd dispersed, and the shop buzzed with laughter and conversation, he took her hand and led her to the back garden, a space she hadn't even had time to finish yet. There, strung from the fence and over the branches of the old pear tree, were dozens of tiny lanterns glowing softly in the dusk. Her breath caught. "You did this?" she whispered. "I had help. But yes. I thought you should see your dream lit up." A string quartet began playing in the distance, and she turned to find a few of Camden's friends, people she hadn't even met, smiling as they sat up near the tree. He held out his hand. "Dance with me." She hesitated. "There's no one else here." "Exactly." She took his hand. Under the soft lights, on the uneven stone path, they danced. Slowly, quietly, like they had all the time in the world. "I used to imagine moments like this," she said, resting her head against his shoulder. "And I always thought they'd feel impossible. But this feels like breathing." He kissed her hair gently. "It's not a fairy tale, Addison. It's better. It's real." She pulled back just enough to see his face. "I love you," she said. "Not because of anything you've given me or what you have. But because when I was afraid to believe in myself, you did." His eyes glistened. I love you too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught again, but this time for a different reason. I wasn't going to do this tonight, he said. But then I saw you in that dress standing in front of something you built with your own hands, and I knew. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, delicate, vintage, with the center stone surrounded by tiny emerald leaves. I want to build a life with you, Addison. One that's honest and messy and real. Will you marry me? She blinked, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the music. Yes, she whispered. Yes. He slipped the ring on her finger, and the moment felt like it belonged to no one else but them. They didn't hear the applause from the back patio until a few seconds later. Apparently, someone had peeked through the garden gate. Addison laughed and leaned into him, burying her face against his chest. Guess we're not as alone as we thought. Camden kissed her temple. Doesn't matter. As long as I have you. And with the lanterns glowing above them, her hands wrapped in his, Addison finally understood the truth she'd been too scared to say out loud until now. She hadn't just opened a flower shop. She'd opened her life to love, to risk, to something she'd once thought was out of reach. She had met a man at church. She hadn't known he was a millionaire. But she had fallen in love with him anyway. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of evergreen, casting golden stripes across the wooden floors. Addison stood behind the counter, arranging a set of pale ranunculus in a porcelain vase shaped like a teapot. The shop had been open for 3 months now, and business was better than she could have hoped. Every day brought new customers, locals, tourists, even a few brides-to-be who had seen her arrangements online and wanted consultations. But this morning felt different. Because tonight she was getting married. The thought made her pause, fingers stilling around the delicate stems. Her heart fluttered not from nerves, but from the quiet certainty that had grown stronger with each day she'd spent by Camden's side. Not once had he wavered. Not during the long nights she spent calculating expenses, not when she'd snapped at him for accidentally overwatering a batch of hydrangeas, not even during the city's unexpected inspection that nearly delayed her opening. He had been her anchor, not by taking over, but by standing beside her, always steady, always present. The bell above the door jingled, and her best friend, Danny, breezed in holding 2 coffees and a garment bag. I know you said no one was allowed to fuss over you today, but tough luck. Danny grinned, kicking the door closed with her heel. You're the bride. You're not allowed to wield pruning shears this close to the ceremony. Addison let out a low laugh. I was just finishing this arrangement for Mrs. Talbot. She's picking it up at noon. Danny handed her a coffee. Mrs. Talbot can wait. You have a dress to put on. And a man to marry. Addison glanced at the garment bag. You brought the dress? Of course I did, Danny said, setting it carefully on the back storage room hook. And I brought the shoes. And the hairpins. I'm not letting you sneak off to City Hall in sneakers. Addison's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it and smiled. Camden's name lit up the screen with a simple message, I love you. See you soon. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. He already knew. By early afternoon, the shop was closed, the sign flipped, and Addison stood in front of the mirror in the upstairs room of the old house Danny's cousin had renovated into a boutique event space. Her dress was a soft satin ivory, with a low back and sleeves that kissed her wrists. Nothing flashy. Nothing extravagant. Just right. Danny pinned a cluster of tiny white blossoms into her hair. You look like exactly who you are. Addison smiled at her reflection. That's all I want to be. Downstairs, the ceremony space was filled with the people who'd carried her through the hardest chapters of her life. Her former coworkers from the dental office. A few of her mother's friends who still called to check on her every Christmas. The staff from the community center who'd championed her idea. And of course, Camden's tight-knit circle of colleagues and old friends, all dressed sharp and beaming like proud parents. Camden waited at the front of the room, his dark suit tailored to perfection, his tie the same shade of green as the evergreen sign. He held himself with the same quiet confidence he always had, but when Addison stepped into view, something in his face softened. His hands relaxed at his sides. His shoulders eased. His eyes never left hers. As she walked toward him, the room fell away. The officiant, a warm-voiced woman from their church, welcomed them with a smile. "We are gathered here not because Addison and Camden complete each other," she began, "but because they choose to walk forward together, whole and honest, without pretense or fear." Camden's fingers tightened slightly around Addison's, and she smiled up at him. After the vows which they'd written themselves, filled with quiet promises and unpolished truths, they exchanged rings. His was a simple gold band. Hers, the same vintage piece with emerald leaves he'd given her in the garden behind the shop. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Camden didn't hesitate. He kissed her like the world was finally quiet, like everything that had led them here had been worth it. Later, after the laughter, the toasts, and a dinner that ended with pie instead of cake, Addison's choice, they slipped away from the crowd and wandered outside into the mild spring evening. The stars were just beginning to show above the treetops, and the scent of wild jasmine drifted on the breeze. They walked hand in hand along the gravel path behind the house, where a wooden swing swayed gently from an old oak. Addison sat first, tugging him beside her. "This doesn't feel like a beginning or an ending," she said softly. "It feels like a continuation." He looked out at the trees. "That's how I know it's right." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" "What?" "The rush. The deals. The jet setting." He was quiet a moment. "I still do some of that. Just less. On my terms. But no, I don't miss what it costs me. I was always chasing something. Now I'm building something." She turned to face him. "With me. Only with you." They sat in silence for a while, the swing creaking gently beneath them. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I never thought I'd meet someone who saw me without seeing the money first. I never thought I'd meet someone who'd see my dream before I did." He took her hand again, threading their fingers together. "Let's promise each other something. Okay. No matter how much we grow, how much we build, we keep this. The quiet. The honesty." She nodded. "And the dancing in empty gardens." He smiled. "Especially that." A breeze stirred the branches above them, and Addison leaned into his warmth. They had weathered secrets, uncertainty, and fear. They had chosen not to run from their differences, but to learn from them. Now they stood as equals, two people who had found love not in perfection, but in persistence. 1 week later, Camden surprised her with a short trip to the coast, a quiet cottage near the edge of a cliff, overlooking the ocean. No phones. No emails. Just them, a fireplace, and long unhurried mornings. On the last night, they sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch, sipping wine as the waves crashed below. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket. She eyed him warily. "If it's another key, I swear." He handed her a folded sheet of paper. "What is this?" "Just read." She unfolded it. It was a list of business names. All flower-themed. All crossed out, except one at the bottom. Evergreen and Company. She looked up at him. "I want to invest in your expansion," he said. "As a partner. Silent if you want. But I believe you're going to do more than just run one shop. I want to be there for that. Not to control it. To support it." Her eyes filled. "You really think it can grow? I think you're unstoppable." She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her bag. "Then let's do it. Together." The next morning, they drove back to the city with the windows down, the scent of salt and pine in the air. Addison returned to Evergreen with a new sign, ordered a small addition beneath the original, and Company. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. 1 year later, the second location of Evergreen opened in a neighboring town. Addison hired 2 assistants, both young women who dreamed of owning shops one day. Camden stood in the back during the soft opening, holding their daughter born 6 weeks earlier, named Eloan, wrapped in a green blanket. Addison caught his eye across the room. He mouthed the words she already knew. I love you. And for the first time in her life, Addison Brooke Knox didn't feel like she was waiting for something to begin. She was already living the dream. Fully, deeply, and entirely in love with her life, her family, and the man who had once picked up her purse in a church pew and changed everything.